Pistol suar, juga dikenali pistol isyarat, adalah pistol berkaliber besar yang melepaskan suar, peluru kosong dan asap. Pistol suar biasanya digunakan untuk menghasilkan isyarat kecemasan.
Welcome to Craig's Gun Channel. In today's video, we're going to cover flare guns. By definition, a flare gun is a large-bore handgun that discharges aerial flares. These flares are used as distress signals or for remote signaling and even for illumination. The most common version of the flare launcher we encounter today was due to the work of Edward Wilson Very, who developed a single-shot breech-loading short-barreled pistol that fired flares, or what would become known at the time as Very lights. These pistols used a single-action trigger and generally had barrels with a 1-inch bore. However, other calibers and gauges were also used. For example, the standard U.S. flare gun in military service during the First World War was the 10-gauge Remington Mark III. Following World War I and through World War II, most combatant nations used flare launchers ranging from 25mm to over 30mm. While most flare guns utilized a single barrel, double, triple, or even more were also fielded. Since the Second World War, most flare launchers have generally been produced in one of four now standardized sizes: 12-gauge, 25mm, 26.5mm, and 37mm, with the 37mm being the civilian flare launcher version of the military 40mm grenade launcher. The most commonly sold flare pistol in the US today is the Alerter Basic 12-gauge launcher by Orion. This launcher is a plastic break-open single-action launcher that utilizes their proprietary 12-gauge flares. Being made of plastic is obviously it will not hold up to a lot of use. However, it's designed and intended to only be used for emergency distress signaling, so in that context, its plastic construction is perfectly fine. It launches their aerial flares up to 500 feet, burning at 16,000 candela for up to 7 seconds. Orion also produces a 25mm version similar in all respects, except it utilizes a 25mm flare, and it will launch up to 375 feet. While it doesn't go as high, the flares burn at 33,000 candela and are visible for over 25 miles. The next most common flare launcher likely to be encountered is the 26.5mm military surplus versions. These were produced in large numbers during the Cold War by a variety of countries and were commonly available from surplus dealers during the 80s and 90s. While they can still be found and are available, supplies are now less common, and the surplus flares, which were once plentiful, are getting harder to acquire and more expensive. These were designed to fire a variety of these military-grade 26.5mm shells, and they range from single-star shells, multiple star shells, smoke shells, and parachute illumination flares. These pistols will launch flares up to 300 meters, where they'll produce over 20,000 candela for up to 8 seconds. The illumination flares will burn at over 28,000 candela for 15 seconds, and they'll illuminate up to 15 acres. Supplies of surplus flares are drying up. However, barrel inserts are produced that allow you to load and launch the more commonly available 12-gauge flares. Let's take a closer look at some of these. And the first flare launcher that we're going to take a look at today is the Orion, their basic Alerter 12-gauge flare launcher. This is a all-plastic construction flare launcher. It has plastic barrel, plastic frame, even the hammer is plastic. Now the firing pin is metal. There is a metal breech face insert that's put in to help give a little bit of durability. But by and large, it is pretty much all made out of plastic. Now, while this would not, hold up well to really repeated use for its intended design, which would be for emergency distress, launching, its plastic design's perfectly fine. These are generally sold in fishing and boating departments of most marinas, as well as several major chain big box stores, which is where I picked this one up. You can run across older versions of this flare gun out there with the name Olin on it. This is an older design before the company rebranded their safety flare division. One thing to note, there was a large recall on the Olin launchers from several years ago. The flares have also been redesigned, so I would hesitate to use one of the older Olin units. These pistols, they're not expensive, so it's not worth possible injury to use one of those older ones. These can literally be picked up for under $50 generally. You can buy a kit that includes the launcher and several flares. Now this is what the flares look like. They're a Orion flare. It says it's 7-second burn time for marine use and Orion signal launchers only. And of course, simply the way they work is you would open up the top brake action. You would put in your flare, and just in case you're wondering, these are already fired flares, so there's no danger of anything going on there. See, they're all empty on the inside. Then you would simply lower the barrel back into position, cock the hammer back, and then pull the trigger to fire it. There is no safety, and you'd want to make sure it's always pointed in a safe direction whenever it's loaded. And then, of course, whenever you go to fire it, make sure you point it up. It's kind of hard to miss the sky. There's no sights on it, just there's the little top rib there. The intent for these to be used, though, is you literally just point them straight up into the air and pull the trigger. So, that's the Orion. They're a basic alerter. Next one we'll look at, this is a military surplus 26.5mm flare pistol. This one is a West German unit. It's manufactured by Gecko, and it's from the early 70s. It's a very well-made, heavy-duty unit that features solid construction and tight lockup. It's manufactured with a steel barrel and stamped steel frame. It has plastic grip panels. It's a single-action trigger. You would manually cock the hammer back to fire, and then there's no safety. Just pull the trigger to fire. This is the breech release. You'd pull that back and it will open up the barrel. It is spring loaded, as you can see there. So when you pull that back, it'll automatically pull the barrel down. It does have an ejector on it right here that will eject the spent shells. This is one of the aerial parachute flare shells. There again, this one's already been fired, so this is just a empty case. But to load one of these, you would simply put the flare into the barrel, into the breech and barrel, lock it into place, cock the hammer back, point it into the sky, and pull the trigger. Now, of course, whenever you have a flare in here, you want to make sure it's always pointed in a safe direction. And when you lift the barrel up, it will lift the empty shell out. Then you can remove the empty shell for the next shot. Now these, unlike the Orion signal launchers, these are very well made and will stand up to repeated use. They were made for military service. So we'll go ahead and look at our next one. The next one I have here is a Polish Model 78, manufactured in 1984 at the Radom Arsenal in Poland. The Radom M78 is a licensed copy of the H&K Model P2A1. It features a polymer frame, reinforced with steel rails on the inside, and of course has a steel barrel and breech face. Operates the same way. There's no safety. It's a single action. You would cock the trigger back to be able to fire it. This unlocks the breech, unlocks the action. So we would simply pull that down and it will come up. There again, it's sprung as well and has an ejector. And if you look on the inside, you can kind of see the, maybe it's kind of hard to see, it's black on black here. But you have your steel reinforcing rails in there in the polymer plastic. There again, function is the same way. This is a red star shell. There again, empty case. Go ahead and you load it by putting the shell into the chamber, closing the action, pulling back the trigger or the hammer, and then when you pull the trigger, it would fire the flare. Now, both of these surplus units and the Orion 12 gauge for that one matter does have a trigger safety, so the firing pin will not protrude unless you're actually pulling the trigger. Then the firing pin will protrude out. If you're not pulling the trigger, it won't protrude far enough to fire the shell. This is to help prevent possible accidental discharge if it's dropped. Now, I had mentioned that the surplus flares, they are starting to run out. So you can use the 12 gauge flares with these. and that's through use of a metal insert such as this one. These are generally made out of aluminum, and basically what they do is they fit inside. You'd load it just like you would a flare, and then once that's loaded in place, you would put the 12 gauge flare, there again, there's an empty one, in, close it up, and then it functions just like normal, launching the 12 gauge flare. Now, to remove the flare, you would need to basically dump it out, and that allows you to use the 12 gauge flares. So, that's the different flare guns. Let's take them out to the range and see how they do. First, I wanted to try the Orion 12 gauge launcher. Even though it's plastic, I was impressed by how well it performed. Recoil was mild, and it really launched the flare up there where it burned brightly. Next, we moved up to the 26.5mm flare launchers. The difference in how they fired was striking. While I knew it would have much more recoil, it was much more than I anticipated. The recoil and blast was impressive, and it really launched the flares out there. After we fired several flares in the two pistols, we inserted the 12 gauge converter and tried that out. It performed well, launching them just like the Orion launcher did. And we have the Gecko, a 12 gauge flare insert, and an Orion 12 gauge flare. Finally, we shot some of the illumination flares. These were very impressive and lit the fields up much brighter than I thought they would. Before the days where night vision gear was generally deployed, these would have been used to light up the surrounding area to great effect. One note of caution with all of these flare launchers, whether they're the new Orion plastic ones or the 12 gauge insert for the larger flare guns, they're only designed for use with 12 gauge flares. It's illegal to shoot 12 gauge ammunition out of them. Furthermore, they will not handle those pressures generated by 12 gauge shotgun shells, and they will fail catastrophically if it's attempted, causing severe injury or possibly even death. Just don't try it. I hope that this information is of value, and if you like the video, I would ask that you hit the like button. If you want to continue to see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe and notify buttons so you don't miss anything. I value your comments and feedback, and as always, until next week, stay safe.
Sekian, terima kasih. Like, share dan subscribe.